Coming to you live, but not really. It is all pomp and no circumstance with Ryder Richards on LetUsThinkAboutIt.com, the amateur hour you should never tune into.
Welcome back. This is Ryder Richards, and today we're continuing our discussion on the demotion of reality in favor of subjectivity. As a recap in step 79, I claim that reality acts as a filter, or a net, between science and religion and the simulacra. That was an interesting thought. It is a good experiment, but it had some flaws, and specifically it's at what point you declare science a religion or religion a simulacrum, just lies. So yeah, that's tricky. Now in step 80, I proposed a different model, and it's that of a ladder. I claim that reality was a ground and truth was an abstraction that sprang from it, which leads to science, then onwards to unverifiable religious beliefs, and onward to outright lies, propaganda, and simulacra. Now, at the end of step 80, to sort of talk about consequences, I brought up Zizek's idea on apocalypse, which definitionally means revelation. And that was to make the point that we live in a world where our desires are met more than we attend to the inconveniences and problems of physical material reality. Because of this, we will continually be confronted by catastrophes that show us that we're actually in the middle of the apocalypse right now. I mean, it has been revealed to us. It's currently happening all around us, but we're actively, pathologically confounded and refuse to see it. And even if we do see it, we refuse to react to it because that would harm our carefully manufactured belief in our individual sovereignty. So first, today, we're going to lay some groundwork, some context, and we're going to recap some of Kant's philosophical ideas. We're going to get into Kant's quarrel with objects. Who argues with objects? And it's really how he split the world so we can have an escape from reality. After that, we're going to touch on the problem with the transcendent, why Kant's false dichotomy is really not even necessary. He breaks down freedom versus determinism. Maybe not necessary. We're also going to talk about the current consequences of this and maybe a path to shed this confounding ideology. Now, this episode is going to seem like an anti-Kant rant. A Kant rant? I don't know. But it's really just a way to consider our psychology that leads us away from reality. And it just happens to be using Kant as an example. Naturally, all cultures are based on storytelling. This is language, it's myth, it's ideals. And that binds a society together and lets us function. I'm not trying to undermine that completely. I'm just asking for a different point of view today, one that really recognizes reality and how we have stepped past it. Part 1. The shift from reality to belief. So let's do a contextual historical grounding real quick to grasp Kant's motivations. So way back in 1651, Thomas Hobbes wrote Leviathan. And this had a fairly pessimistic, maybe realistic view of people, saying if society broke down, we would revert to our selfish selves. Without the state, in the state of nature, life would of course be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Now, Leviathan argues that we need a strong, sovereign authority, a state to enforce peace because of human self-interest or selfishness. Still, he says we're rational and we understand the need to live in a society of rules, even if we're kind of conflicted about it and kind of want to break the rules. Now, Hobbes met Galileo Galilei. This is the astronomer-physicist back in 1629. And what's fascinating about that is they share kind of a similar worldview of a mechanical reality, which to a lot of people smacks of determinism. I'm not a cog, I'm a human, right? It's that kind of thing. So the idea here is think of the fate implied by having to utterly believe the predictive power of your horoscope. What if it was true every day and you just had to live by it? So yeah, that's determinism. Now, the year Galileo died, Isaac Newton was born. It's almost like they switched souls or something. And he would continue examining and expanding our grasp of reality through observational experiments, hypothesis and falsification, science and causality. So this mechanistic view of causal reality comes from the natural sciences and the empiricist worldview. But of course, Galileo and Newton, both of these dudes had some trouble squaring the observations with belief in God. This was also similar to Darwin and other people, right? So Newton passed away back in 1726. So we've spanned, roughly 100 years here. It's about the time of Immanuel Kant's birth. Now, this is the man who would square this God observation conundrum. Kant introduces a philosophy that actually does have a square grid in it. Hey, what do you know? And with the influential idea of a priori knowledge, that floats off in one corner. Now, this abstract knowledge, it exists in Kant's unknowable noumenal realm. This marked a departure from Hobbes and Newton, of course. And these guys emphasize submitting to the laws of reality. And these laws were discovered through science and experimentation, and that was how they uncovered the secrets of this realm. Instead, Kant's philosophy, through some logic, allowed for the individual to access a realm where they are sovereign and autonomous outside of reality. Sure, they still had to contend with this realm, with the Leviathan and natural laws in the phenomenal space, but the most important truthful aspect of who you are exists in a realm beyond us. Now, this is kind of like heaven or Never Never Land, but just for smart people. Part 2, Kant's quarrel. So this is kind of odd, but Immanuel Kant, had a quarrel with reality and objects in reality, which led to this invention of the noumenal land. Matthew Crawford talks about it this way. Kant did not like the idea that we had to submit to the authority of objects. Objects imposed and influenced our perception and behavior, which interfered with our ability to self-govern. So think about that for a second. Your chair or the weather, it's somehow impeding you from exercising your will. This threatened heteronomy. Heteronomy is a concept from Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Now, heteronomy means to be influenced or ruled by alien forces outside of oneself, rather than the autonomy of self-directed reason. So that is, external authority is ruling and manipulating you, and you should want freedom from this influence upon you. Now, what happens is this moves quickly from objects in reality to a moral argument that demonizes reality. Now, here's a quote from Kant. Moral teleology compensates for physical teleology, and for the first time supplies a basis for theology. For physical teleology on its own could not provide a basis for anything but a demonology. Facing a world that did not bend to internal human conceptions of meaning? That was an assault on dignity for Kant. This was a perversion of what he thought the natural order should be. So, Kant's ideas of order were perverted by actually having to submit to reality. Instead, by God, reality should bend to our will, as if we are God. Part 3, Kant's freedom from reality. Now, quickly, let's walk through how Kant actually frees us from reality's alien demonic influence. And he does this by splitting the world into phenomenal and noumenal. He introduces the idea that a priori truth is prior to experience. We can know, by definition, that all bachelors are men without having to meet all bachelors. Sir, are you a man? Which, of course, you can't ask today. So anyway, we can agree that there are truths that do not need to be experienced to be agreed upon. Okay, that's logical, right? Now, to extend this, even when we do encounter the real world, our perceptions are limited to appearance. Frustratingly, we cannot know everything about the objects we encounter. So that means our phenomenal experience is lacking and cannot account for reality. It's quite limited. Now, a simple example of this is a microscope looking at something like a loaf of bread, which can show us a reality and a life, including like bacteria and stuff, which we could not actually perceive unaided. So even our mental mode of bread, we encounter it every day and it's incomplete. So how much more are we actually missing? There must be truth beyond this realm that we can see beyond appearances. Now, equally, Kant says that beyond our limited senses, our mind is limited too. It's really just not built to understand the totality of objects we encounter. So what happens is we break this down and say there is the appearance of the thing, And then there's also what we cannot see or know, and that is the thing in itself, which is beyond us. It's inaccessible to us, but we know it's there, and it is the truth of what the thing really is. Now, he calls this unknowable realm where the truth resides the noumena. This invokes a realm neither material nor immaterial, as Mark Fisher says, but an inaccessible site of the transcendent subject, where identity is produced, which is outside of our reach and, according to Kant, not subject to the causal forces of the laws of nature. That's wild, right? Because it's beyond physical laws, but it's also changeable. So this noumenal realm, I don't know, it functions completely differently than nature. So what we're going to do real quick is context check, right? We can see how we went from reality-based processes with Galileo and Newton. This is observational, falsifiable, causality-based reality, into this second realm, an invented realm that is, logical, but it's beyond reality. It's a transcendent realm, which contains a truth beyond what we can know. Next, Kant undermines Hobbes' notion that we need a sovereign authority to control our self-interest, our selfishness. And that is by saying we are autonomous, and as rational creatures, we are sovereign. We don't need a sovereign over us. We too actually are a thing in itself with a noumena. There is a realm of our true self, and this is kind of like a spirit or a soul, right? It maps onto that pretty easily. And as a split self in the phenomenal and noumenal realm, we exist in both simultaneously, our noumenal self can make rational moral decisions without being influenced by those heteronymous, deterministic, causal, physical laws. Kant actually says, as rational creatures, we can give ourselves morality rather than having it dictated to us. That sounds cool, right? So everyone here, of course, has their own phenomenal experience of reality. That's from the world of phenomenal appearances, which is really all we can ever access. But with reason, which, by the way, exists in the nominal realm, we can reason toward a moral teleology. Okay, yeah, so this is all kind of whatever. It's dragging on a bit, but I'm going to make one more little logical argument that Kant makes that seems very true, but later on we're going to debunk it. So determinism, this Newtonian causal phenomenal reality, it rules out free will. Yeah, we don't like that, right? It's like fate. And if we were to hold people accountable for their actions, that is to punish them, we have to presuppose they have free will to make their decisions. So this says you can't punish people or reward them if it's all deterministic, if it's all horoscopes and fate. So this opened the door intellectually to individual subjective autonomy and free will. Kant allowed a move away from objective facts, similar to religion, right, toward belief and faith. But also, subjective experience is seen as valid on its own, independent of material evidence. So here's the deal. This may not have actually been his intent, but maybe it was. But his noumenal realm vouches for a deeper reality, supporting ideological beliefs without needing justification or facts. Truth can now be internally apprehended. So the correspondence, the feedback between your truth and reality, it's short-circuited, right? It collapses. So this has proliferated subjective relativism across society, where multiple conflicting worldviews are now embraced as personal truths, more important than anything else, and they really just ignore any external constraints. Now, from a psychological point of view, our Hobbesian self-interest, going all the way back to Hobbes, right? We always wanted this move. We wanted our selfishness. This is for us to be more important than reality or anything else, subject only to our own wishes. The noumena really is the never never land, where we never have to grow up. Part 4. The contradiction of transcendental ideology. So we may not think about this much, which is actually kind of the point of beliefs. It's to not think about them. It's to just trust and have faith and build your life around them and really make them part of who you are. But the general argument against the transcendent is that positing realms beyond knowable reality introduces contradictions. These transcendental visions, they actually promise expanded possibilities of freedom and understanding. However, the inaccessibility of those proposed realms also shuts down any ability to definitively confirm, deny, or move beyond the initial ideological framework. So, Slavoj Žižek, he notes how this transcendental frame, as he calls it, simultaneously widens conceivable horizons while also becoming the absolute limit on what can be rationally contemplated. So, Marxism, psychoanalysis, and Derrida and deconstructionism, all of these exhibit this tendency, even while claiming to unlock repression or fixed assumptions. At some point, they actually just refix those assumptions elsewhere, and this becomes the limiting frame. But it's usually further up the ladder into belief. It's not really facts or truth at this point. So while Kant, we're back to him again, he asserts that the noumenal grants free will via pure reason, and this can transcend chains of physical causality. Well, the problem with this is we can never actually confirm this, right? Reason alone supposedly proves the noumenal realm's existence, yet it can never breach the barriers between the phenomena and noumena. Like we're stuck between these, right? Now, this leaves pure logic to endlessly circle internal paradoxes without any accountability to reality. Now, to make it worse, Kant actually seemed to realize this. And as Zizek points out, Kant says you can reason your way to morality, just like he did. And you will arrive at the highest good and categorical imperative, just like Kant did. But, here's the deal. Very few people are disciplined rational actors, right? They're mostly kind of irrational slobs. We're desiring subjects. We're always clamoring for ever more emotional, neurotic fulfillment. We're craving stability and excess simultaneously, and we're lashing out when we don't get it. So yeah, are we rational actors, or are we just nasty and brutish? Part 5. The false dichotomy of freedom and determination. Matthew Crawford challenges a supposed existential conflict between human freedom and deterministic laws, nature. So this thing between freedom and determinism, the machinic world, he says it's really a false dichotomy that Kant created. And it leads to solutions to solve problems that maybe shouldn't exist or there's simpler solutions for. Now, one way to think about this is when we think of freedom, how free are you on a daily basis? Probably think you're free, but you're probably not very, even though you might insist that you are. And this is despite most of your life being quite determined by circumstance and causality. So what has happened here is we have culturally burdened some of these terms, such as freedom, to such an extent that we cannot even see them clearly anymore. We think we have freedom without even understanding what freedom is. Now, Crawford proposes that meaningful choice emerges, not through banging on about freedom and autonomy and self-determination, but through attentive interaction with reality's concrete challenges and limitations. By grappling with tangible constraints and feedback in the world, in the real world, we develop dimensions of freedom relevant to situated possibilities. So that is, we gain skills in dealing with reality, by dealing with reality. And this offers a path to agency, true, genuine agency without needing transcendent visions. Yeah, so here there actually seems to be some genuine dignity in accepting reality. So rather than argue a false dichotomy, Crawford proposes we just pay attention, which leads to active decisions which provide choice and genuine agency, not abstract agency. Transcendence is simply not necessary, nor is a superstitious boogeyman of deterministic luck or fate. Creativity and self-direction, they arise from working through and with boundaries, not avoiding them. True freedom, it looks less like this kind of pure internal directed volition, more like discovering channels of expression and influence by embracing how we are embedded in the world, not escaping it. Part 6. The ascent into abstraction. Immanuel Kant, he introduced this rigorous ethical system, and he sort of invoked these ideas like the categorical imperative, which is kind of like the golden rule, and this is all to temper the subjective turn in his philosophy. At least that's what I think. Because what I think here is he attempts to formalize moral reasoning. That is, if you buy into his transcendental framework, phenomena, noumena, you should also buy into his moral valuations. But of course, this kind of smacks of medicine, like a medicine coating on the everlasting gobstopper. It says, be rational, be moral, treat your subjective freedom with restraint and responsibility. Well, okay, yuck, but what if I pay lip service to that? Maybe then I can sort of indulge in a convenient fiction. Maybe I can abdicate reality's burdens and claim that this is my personal morality, my personal belief system. Yes, my phenomenal experience, it led me to this line of reasoning, and I have properly rationalized it. I am now free, and basically, I'm done grappling with universal principles. No more vegetables, just candy for me. Thank you. Now, on this slippery slope of less and less rigor and more personal freedom, self-governance slid into self-entitlement. Responsibility shifts from checking yourself against reality to inventing yourself, and of course, in increasingly extravagant ways. Now, this diversification of selves with subjective morality, this is liberal individualism. It's just sort of stripped of the Enlightenment's hardships and cultural mores, the structure and background and rigor, which really were just a drag on our frictionless existence that we want. So I'm not going to try to romance this too much because it really does suck, but there's still diligent work and kind of a sober duty you can get value from in attending to reality. So what we find here is that reality, when we encounter it, it pushes back. You actually have to attune yourself to it, not demand things of it, but it actually opens up possibilities of true, genuine, actual agency through skillful consideration. Now, instead, of course, it seems much easier in the near term to just manipulate abstractions and language and further warp Kant's ideals into self-serving dogmas.
Part 7. Consequences of Transcendent Beliefs.
So, the larger problem is that when our entire culture wants to believe something, such as our self-importance, well, it persists. Takes on power. It might be a simulacrum, maybe a third or fourth order lie that has really lost its grounding in reality. But if we all believe hard enough, our society will actually scapegoat those who offer a different perspective. Aha, take care of that problem. Now, the problem here is that a widespread adherence, a kind of wisdom of crowds approach to subjective and transcendent beliefs that actually have sort of an accountability escape clause? This reinforces assumptions of special access to higher truth. We all have access to higher truth. Mine's higher than yours. But maybe here what we actually need is lower truth, because the amplification of specialness and transcendent truths, it generates differentiation rather than agreement. It produces more individuation, which produces new access to novel truths. These truths are attenuated and abstracted. They're actually kind of stretched and they're esoteric. Now, this all is really exciting. It's an exciting creation. It's self-creation. It's moral creation. It's heterogeneity abounds. But also, if we go back to Hobbes, we get to claim, well, where does the state get off enforcing peace? I never signed the social contract. So this is an agreement. It's actually kind of breaking that apart. So what's fascinating is that even as all this newness appears, this novelty, we immediately deny its implications, simply reveling in it a bit before moving on. Now, Zizek points out how we work to deny truth when catastrophe appears. That is, even as we imagine it, we invent a universalist ideology to justify escaping it. We harbor in our inner refuge, our inner refusal, our escapist realm. From inside here, in our noumenal mind, we can escape, and then there we can retain hope inside this realm. Now, this is kind of a perverse optimism because it's bound up with escapism. And what's really happening here is it's founded on a pessimism of engaging in the world. Granted, the world may be difficult, but as Morita therapy and Matthew Crawford discuss, a primary aspect of depression and narcissism is self-centered fixation. That is, getting stuck in your own head, even if you're thinking about big problems outside of yourself. And the cure is getting involved in the world beyond your head, the world here and now. So, as alluring as beliefs in higher purpose, things like free will may be for meaning, existentially, we actually remain far more determined by our circumstances. So it's odd to consider that much of our pain and anxiety, that is, our psychological dysfunction and schizophrenic mania, is caused by believing in a Kantian split that separates the individual from reality. All right, thank you very much for tuning in. So, in conclusion here, while Kant helped move philosophy into more sophisticated realms concerning epistemology, which is, of course, abstract knowledge about knowledge, his attempts to shield human dignity and creativity from an indifferent universe, it leaves an ambiguous legacy, let's say. And what I'm actually arguing today is that by giving legitimacy to internal moral hopes, he opened the floodgates to overconfidence in transcendent visions, devoid of any demand for evidence. So once again, this has all encouraged a widespread indulgence in comforting fictions that ignore inconvenient realities, which all kind of seems like a recipe for disaster. So on that dark note, thank you again for sticking around. If you liked today's episode, well, you know what to do, right? Rate, review, comment, and share. And as a heads up, the next episode may fall a little bit out of our sort of contextual sequence here, but I think it's a timely topic. I've been asked to give a talk at a museum on January 6th, and it's about art and artificial intelligence. So until next year, this is Ryder Richards reminding you not to noumena your way through the holidays. Stay attuned and stay safe.